Yeah, so thanks for having me. As Abdullah was saying, I work at 23 Sports Intelligence. We're a startup here in London. Well, a startup in our fourth year, so we're no longer as startup-y, but we kind of set off trying to build some technology around football data and analytics for. We started getting our foot in the door with some media companies, particularly, and I can tell you a little bit more about that at the end if you have any questions about exactly what we do for them. And then in the last year and a half or so, we've also expanded into the club world, and we're in a couple of Premier League clubs now with our platform. Um, so I can tell you all about that in the questions if you want. But in terms of the presentation, what I did was I took two presentations that we presented, kind of aimed at different audiences. So the first one is this title slide that you have here. This one was one that Abdullah actually saw in Athens. This was more aimed at a mathematics audience in a mathematics conference. And then I kind of mashed that together with this one, which is one that was more geared. So this is a presentation we did in the OptoPro forum along with my team. And this was presented to a group of kind of club analysts and the like. So it's a little bit more applied. So I guess I thought it would be interesting to simply kind of take both, and then you'll see a bit of a mismatch in the styles across the slides. But basically, I kind of took both, and I'm gonna have one big deck to talk through today for you guys. So right, let's start with some motivation around what we're trying to do. So again, this is about our Persona project. So in terms of the objective that we had in doing this project is the idea of operationalizing the playing style of football, and by football I mean soccer, of course, teams and players. So what I mean by that, obviously, is you have two big clubs in Spain as an example, Atletico de Madrid and Barcelona, and they're both, I wouldn't say equally successful, but they both kind of always occupy the top spots in the league table. But you'd ask any football fan whether they applied the same style of play, and any football fan kind of recognizes that that's not the case. They'll say, Barcelona play a possession style football with a lot of passes, and Atletico de Madrid famously kind of play a defensive style, really resilient in defense. So there's a difference in style, but let's say that difference in style isn't going to be overt just by looking at the actual outcome, the performance, the number of points, the number of goals. So is there any sort of way in which we can operationalize that in some way? This is a very general, high level question, but it's one that I've always found a little bit interesting, and kind of was the subject of my first work in sports analytics. And then I guess that question also extends to players. So, and then another example that I have here is Kevin De Bruyne and N'Golo Kante, who play for City, Manchester City, and Chelsea respectively. And I put this example up because they're both midfielders playing a 4-3-3 in big teams in the Premier League, but arguably have very different styles as well. So kind of, how can we get to this? How can we even start operationalizing these concepts, and how can we do that kind of in a scalable way that that is really applicable for applied questions in football data analytics? So in terms of supervised research in football, football is an extremely low scoring sport, and I would say that the majority of supervised research is really only good over larger timeframes. In a very black box kind of way, very non-descriptive, if you wanted to do something like predict attacking prowess or that sort of thing. And kind of what I'd argue is that the question of style is definitely either answered via manual analysis, rather the analyst kind of giving their opinion about what style is, or in an unsupervised way, because really you've got nothing to control style against. So obviously, in this objective of trying to achieve playing style, I think it's safe to assume that you want to do playing style as an encoded vector. You probably want to have the playing style of a given team or player be an observation in a vector space, and you want that vector space to kind of correspond to a metric space around the the actual style in the sense of distances and everything around those lines. This is a very convenient and usable way that you could get to style. So I'll give you an example of something like that a colleague of mine in the industry here in London presented. His name is Ben Torveni, and he kind of presented in a conference before this project, something called Player to Vec, which was kind of inspired from word to vec from natural language processing, in which just like you do in natural language processing, you have a sequence of words, so the cat in the hat set on, and then what you want to do is do an embedding of words, a semantic embedding of words into a vector space, such that the distance between cat and dog is less than the distance between cat and phone. And you do this by looking at the sequentiality of data and how you can replace one word in the sequence by another. And I guess football has that same idea of sequentiality, and you could try and do something about embedding the actions of individual players in that same way, and then kind of using that embedding space to represent the style of the player. And this is something he presented, which was quite interesting. And then he had the example about Messi and all the other players who are comparable to Messi, who are closest comparable to Messi. So then, the first question that you see something like this and you say, okay, is this actually answering something around the style of play of the given player? And to that question, I would answer that I think it is, but then it kind of raises the question of how do we even know? And I'll get to how do we even know that it is stylistic, the output of something like this. But it's also, it's a really interesting example, but it's also got a couple of problems. And some of the problems that you find in this method is that first, it's a bit of a batch execution, which isn't great for applications. So you take the last 3 seasons of data, you look at all the players participating in sequences, and then you find an embedding for them. But once you've done that embedding, then that's really, you're kind of stuck with that. And then if you want to do it next season, you kind of have to do it again. And it kind of always lives in that one, a single run kind of paradigm. It's also player first rather than style first. So what we mean by this is the style is represented by the player. There's no description of the player other than the observations of the style, other than the observations of this player. And then ultimately, it kind of doesn't really correspond with intuitive notions of style. So its applications are limited if you want to use it talking to people, applied practitioners in the field, like people at clubs directly. But I think that's something that Ben was onto was the natural language processing. It's an extremely rich area in data science and in machine learning. And I think I kind of, we on a different area of natural language processing, we find what we think is a pretty good application in terms of style. And that application is Latent Dirichlet Allocation, which is a specific method in topic extraction. So in terms of topic extraction, Latent Dirichlet Allocation works on word matrices. So something like what you have on the screen, where you have a set of documents and each document has the frequency of different words that appear in it. And what Latent Dirichlet Allocation does is it outputs a mixture model of topics, and it describes topics that best represent the set of training documents that you give it to, and the best representation is given by each topic, each document being made up as a mixture model of the different topics. So you have a topic, when you have a topic model on documents, you say each document has a mixture of correspondence to each topic. So a document might be 50% about politics, 30% about religion, and 20% about current events. And the way that each of these topics look is their distribution, a probability distribution on the set of words. So obviously in a topic like religion, the words God, and priest would appear with higher probability, and in and words like parliament and election with a lower probability, whilst in politics you might have the other way around. So kind of the idea behind the method that we applied to extract playing style is, repurpose this as a playing style extraction. So instead of a word matrix, you've got, let's say, a metric or a statistic matrix for players in individual matches. And then what you do is you'll take that as a training set for a latent Dirichlet allocation model to kind of extract stylistic, the equivalent of topics in terms of playing style. So how that looks is that now you're going to have each entity, let's say a team or a player, as a in a match as a mixture model of different styles, and these styles are represented by a probability distribution on the actual words, in this case being statistics within the training set. So if we look at the merits of this approach, it's an unsupervised approach. It doesn't need you don't need to train with any sort of supervision. You can just apply it on a set of observations. It provides a vectorization. The vectorization that it provides is the mixture representation of each entity. So, in this case, the vector would be 0.3, 0.5, 0.2 in this kind of dummy example that I have on the screen. It has a non-batch execution paradigm. So you could, once you've trained the actual model, you could continue to show it new examples, and it's gonna, you can, for each new player that you observe, you can apply the model that you already trained, and it's gonna tell you what the mixture model in terms of styles is for that player or for that team. So topics are document agnostic, and what that means for this is that each style has its own representation. So a style is a probability distribution on the different features, and it doesn't depend on specific examples. So you can actually describe each style. You can say the long ball style, what is it? You can describe it by the probability distribution on all the words, and it's highly descriptive in this sense, because I think when you look at these stats, you can quite easily label the different styles. So ultimately what you get is you get something like this. So as I said, I don't know if I mentioned when I started the presentation that this project for the OptaPro forum was in conjunction with Swansea City. So you're going to see a lot of Swansea City examples on screen as I go through. So you end up seeing something like this, where you get a vector representation of each team's style by a certain by a mixture model on the different topics, and these are topics that we these are stylistic topics that we labeled by looking at the probability distribution. It's usually quite easy because it's quite sparse, so you can see the actual types of stats that are really determining each stylistic topic. So mathematically, Latent Dirichlet Allocation is a generative model. This is the plate notation. So what you have is you have a set of documents, and each document is composed by n words. And then to sample for each document, each word within each document, what you do is you sample from a Dirichlet prior from a Dirichlet distribution on the number of topics with a parameter eta, and you sample from the distribution on each style. You sample the words given also a Dirichlet prior with a parameter alpha. So you end up having something like this. It's a simple kind of Bayes, a simple generative model that you can resolve with any sort of MCMC methodology. And I guess the questions that you'd ask in terms of the application are whether these sparse Dirichlet priors play an important role in the football implementation. They do play an important role in the NLP implementation, because in the NLP implementation, you assume that each document is made up of a few topics. You don't tend to have documents that speak about a wide range of topics, and each topic is really represented by a very sparse representation on the words, on the back of words as well. And I would ask whether they make sense in football. I think when we first applied this methodology, we did leave a fairly sparse prior, but I would say that it depends. It's something that you can question and you can kind of play around with in the application. And then ultimately, we just use kind of an off-the-shelf MCMC sampling algorithm from the scikit-learn library. So some notes on the implementation. In terms of pre-processing, the traditional application in natural language processing traditionally uses a TF-IDF step, which is the term frequency inverse document frequency thing, which is just a pre-processing step. We didn't do this. We just did a normal Z-score scalar when we first built the model. And then in terms of parametric choices, I guess the parametric choices are, as I was saying, the Dirichlet priors and the number of topics and parameters. And then we come back to the idea of how do you even know a parametric choice is working best. And then this is the idea that we've used, is by randomly splitting the sample. So you take, let's say, mesodosal A, mesodosal B when you train, and then you train a model like that with those parametric choices, and then you see the order, the magnitude at which you're classifying the same player that you randomly split into 2 observations of him into the same stylistic category compared to the rest. And then you can control by that. That gives you a nice way to control for the parametric choices. And the good results here, where you're successfully assigning the same style, regardless of having randomly split the observations, kind of also is part of the reason why you know that you're getting something repeatable, that even if you take these entities and you forget, you split all their stats into 2 and you forget that they're the same, you can kind of recognize them again, which I guess kind of corresponds with anything that you'd want to do in terms of style. It corresponds quite well. And then in the end, there's also some empirical examination, I guess, at play here in terms of looking at as I said, there's a lot of empirical kind of work here, because we label the categories, we do all of that sort of thing. So there's also, let's say, a big validation from that respect. So ultimately, what it lets you do is do this sort of thing, and then we go back to the question I was posing at the beginning, that these are 2 very different teams. Can you recognize that difference? And then this is what you get, where we were saying, yeah, Barcelona is clearly classified by that high possession playing style or topic, and then Atletico Madrid has clearly a very different stylistic kind of blueprint given this methodology. And you can do the same for players, of course. So this is these are some midfielder examples. I don't know how much you guys are fans of football, whether this means anything for you and these players, but I think it's a good example to show that these are different players, and in a fairly intuitive way that kind of matches up with what any kind of analyst would say. We are recognizing their difference. There's a lot of applications, obviously, of doing this sort of thing. So you could do trend tracking. So this is from 2019, this deck, but we are seeing how Lyon had changed over 2 different time periods, and what was actually going on in their their stylistic kind of play. You could also look at changing roles. So this is N'Golo Kante, and I think this time frame kind of corresponds with maybe Sarri versus Conte. I'm not sure now, but I think you could kind of see how he started to be used differently, and he was much more involved in like slow build up, passing and defending. He used to play as a much more defensive midfielder, and then he kind of got repurposed to more of a number 8. And then he was doing more dribbling and chance creation. So it's kind of good to see that it gives you, it outputs this in a fairly scalable way. So another application would be a similarity recommender. So you got a player who's leaving a certain team. Can you find the most similar players to him in terms of the stylistic output? So this is an application for Eden Hazard, and then the names on there that could potentially replace him, like Julian Brandt, Shaqiri, Sam Larson, Pedro, Messi, Dybala. They're all pretty good players. I think it's a good list of players. Right. So that is kind of the intro to personas. I think I'm gonna slide over more into that Opta Pro Forum presentation now that, as I said, we did with regards to Swansea. And for that conference, Swansea posed a fairly high-level question, which was this: what playing styles are effective against certain formations or other playing styles? And we wanted to see if we could provide any sort of insight using this method that a club like Swansea could then take and apply into their play. So just as a sort of intro, the first things that you start to look are, well, depending on the formation that teams play, is there a different type of stylistic blueprint or stylistic persona for the teams? So you get this with you look at the observation numbers on those, and you see that there's quite a few. So it's not like a fluke, and you can see that there is a fair difference. Teams that play in a 4-3-3 are dominating possession much more. Teams that play in a 4-4-1-1 are relying more on long balls and defending, etc. Obviously, teams that play with 4-4-2 with 2 strikers, they kind of always try and hit those strikers on long balls. So you start to see this sort of thing. Obviously, for Swansea, you also see it. So this is the first thing that you'd say to them, kind of help them get a grasp of what their different formations are doing for them in terms of the type of play that they achieve. So then what we wanted to do is understand, is there a head-to-head for different types of personas that we can kind of quantify in some sort of way, and then turn that into applicable suggestions in terms of what they should do. So what we did is we took all the observations of personas in the championship that season, and we clustered them and achieved a couple, I think 5 clusters, and then see how those clusters fare against each other. So when we did that, this was cluster 1, and this is one example of Swansea City playing in that cluster. So you can see that they kind of dominated possession of the ball, and then you can see by their passing network that they would passing around the back 4 a lot, and with the central midfielder on the left. So this is one type of game or stylistic output that they have, and that we found. Then you've got clusters, stylistic matches in which they relied much more on fast breaks. And you can compare their passing network, and you see that they were a bit more vertical. They were passing the ball out to that left attacking midfielder quite more often. Then you've got performances focused around long balls. So this is a map of where they were performing long balls from. So you can see that they were performing quite a long balls out from that quadrant behind the halfway line. Then you have a cluster that's all about defending. So this is defending actions, and they kind of just did a lot of defensive actions in their own half. And then you've got a cluster focused around crossing, and this is kind of performances in which they put the ball into the box a lot from the flanks. And you can see from the flank attack map that they were attacking, that the volume of their play was highly concentrated down the flanks in this match. So the first thing that you can do is kind of do a head-to-head result. So when a team plays in a given cluster, how many average points per game do they tend to get? Now, I'd say that this is a bit of an unfairness comparison in the sense that we don't know what the big teams usually play in, and then there might be a correlation from the big teams in terms of the styles that they're playing. So this might not tell us the whole story. So really what we wanted to do was kind of extract the pure impact of one stylistic matchup against the other. So what we did is we did a similar to a Dixon Coles model kind of setup here, where we were trying to model the number of goals that a team A playing against a team B will score by kind of a Poisson sampling, where the parameter depends on how good team A is at attacking. There's a how good is team B at defending, and then there's a how effective. There's a gamma parameter where it's how effective is A style against B specifically. So we try and isolate that. So this is just a distribution plot of for the alpha parameter of every team, given the sampling. And this kind of corresponds to the teams in green are the teams that went to play the playoffs. The teams in red are the bottom 6, and then you've got the middle. So you can see that it kind of aligns quite well to the results. So obviously it's picking up on that kind of that variable strength of attacking. And it kind of gives us confidence that then if we discover kind of signal in the gamma parameters, then it's because that signal is going to be capturing that head-to-head impact of the styles. And this is ultimately what we get. So the way to interpret this graph is playing in a possession style against a long ball style or a crossing style marginally increases your chances of scoring because that parameter is positive. And then I guess the contrary to that is that if you play in a possession style against a fast break style, your chances of scoring are marginally decreased, which kind of makes sense, right? The lore, the football lore around that if you have a lot of the ball and your opponent is capable of hitting you on the fast break, then you're not going to be as effective against them. And then the converse of that also holds. So playing in a fast break against the possession increases your likelihood of scoring. And then this starts to be interesting, where we say that playing in a possession against a possession-based style decreases your chances of scoring. But obviously, if this is happening, then it's happening for both teams, right? Because they both find themselves in the situation where they're playing in a possession against possession. And it's interesting to see that these are going to be like closed off games in which there's going to be few goals. And then you can ask yourself if this happens with any other pair of these, and it does happen for defending versus defending, where if two defensive teams play against each other, then the likelihood of both scoring goes down. So you're going to see close games with a tight scoreline. And then I guess where it happens that both parameters are positive is if one team is playing in a possession style and the other one is playing in a long ball style. The likelihood that they'll both score goes up, so you're more likely to see more goals in these matches. So in terms of comparing one style against another, you can do a net benefit of the number of goals that you'll score, that inflation of the goals that you might score against that style, and then you can subtract from the likelihood of you winning in a game, also by if that parameter subtracts from the likelihood of your opponent scoring, and then you could get like a net benefit, and then this is a table of net benefits of stylistic matchups. So something that was interesting to see here was, do we have any sort of situation in which this sort of thing happens where, depending on the style that your opponent is going to play, should you play in any given style yourself? That and kind of have that decision be guided by the style that your opponent is going to play. So a little bit of game theory, let's call it. So ultimately, what we're looking for is, if your opponent plays in C, then you'd rather play in A. But if your opponent plays in D, then you'd rather play in B. So these are the combinations in terms of A, B, C, D that we find. So the way to that have the biggest kind of difference, in terms of this decision being more relevant. So the way you'd read this is, if your opponent is going to play a long ball style, and that first row, the column C, then you'd rather play in possession. But if your opponent is going to try and hit you on the fast break, you'd rather play a crossing style. And that's how you interpret this table in terms of what it tells you from a tactical perspective. And back when we did this presentation, I think this joke, I was quite proud of it, and then it went over the heads of the audience. Nobody really got it, and I just had to pass the slide because Bristol City were playing Leeds, and then I kind of put both managers in a prisoner to kind of indicate at the prisoner dilemma. They were playing them that weekend when we did this presentation, because you have one of these situations, that biggest kind of trade-off situation that I just presented, and both these teams kind of had it in their locker to play precisely the combination of tactical setups that were most interesting in that respect. So Bristol City could play usually in a long ball style when they played in a 3-5-2 or 4-4-2, or in a fast break style when they played in a 4-1-4-1. So if you're Leeds, you might want to look as well at the kind of what you can do to ensure that your likelihood of playing in the appropriate style that you need, depending on what Bristol City is going to do, and kind of achieve that. So we had some recommendations in terms of the formation or the players that they could put on the pitch, that we presented in that forum in that respect. This went by much quicker than I had anticipated, but that is the set of slides that I had prepared for you guys. So I'm happy to take any questions either on this or on what we do in the wider business and what it is that we do for clubs. So thank you very much.